I really like the background that Bara is using.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's quote unquote mandatory throughout our internal meetings, so I forgot to because my background wouldn't be so representative at the moment, so might as
Okay,
well.
I think let us begin then. Uh, so hi everyone, hi Shiba, hi Bara. Uh, can I mean so I will keep adding participants as they ask to join in, but maybe we thought we could begin a bit with small introductions about yourselves, very small introductions, and then I can read out some of the questions that we have, and towards the end of this session, let's talk a little bit about how people can switch to making a climate career from whatever it is that they're doing, so to speak, now, if that works for everyone. So I will just call out based on who I see first on the screen. So Sheba, I see you on the screen. Would you mind giving us a short introduction of yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sheba. I'm based in Bangalore in the south of India. I have a background in law. Many moons ago, I trained as a professional lawyer, and then I moved back to India when I studied law, and I started to essentially work in rural grassroots development. And I think the transition when you work in sort of rural development or any sort of ground-based development work to climate change is pretty natural, because essentially human economic activity is very intricately related to your ecological assets. Whether it's water, soil, forest, so on and so forth. So this distinction is kind of quite artificial in that sense. So for the past 3-4 years now, my work has primarily been based on finding out that how can we restore, reforest, and bring back biodiversity at a large scale. What are the economic models around that? And essentially what we focused on is what we call regenerative economic development. So the source of any restoration is really looking at alternative economic models. I'm focusing on emerging markets right now, with India and Africa being the main focus of our work. And I'm very happy to talk more about it during our call. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheba. Bara, would you also introduce yourself?
Sure, no problem. So thanks for the time. Biochar Robin, I am now rejoining Conservation National for Asia Pacific region. So as the Blue Carbon Science Director. So I guess my background would be more on environmental engineering back in the days. And I would consider myself more like a generalist rather than a specialist, although my current work is quite specialist in blue carbon. But I roam around Sumatran tigers conservation, go to palm oil waste management system, and then looking at the high level sustainable ocean economy panel throughout my WRI days. And then I got stranded in the blue carbon world, since I guess blue carbon is the bridge between marine and climate change, if that makes sense. So I guess to see both worlds and to work in these two communities somehow kind of broaden up a bit the horizon of conservation itself. So my narrative would be more on the conservation stuff, but I'm happy to learn from all of you as well along the way. Thanks.
Thanks, Bara. So the way we've structured this before is essentially we've had fellows post in questions. Aman, I think you've joined in a little later, so maybe if you have any questions, you can type them on the chat, and then we can we can take them if time permits. What I will do right now is ask these questions that people have asked and to the mentors that they have addressed them to, and then we can have the discussion progress that way. So the first question comes from Faith to Sheba, where she asks, what role do you see biochar playing in forest management and climate change mitigation? Are there any biochar production technology breakthroughs that you know about on the horizon? I will also type this question on the chat just so that people can follow the question.
Thank you. Is Faith on the call? Is she there? She's not there.
No, no.
So Aman's there, Larissa. I can't see your name here. Is anyone else here interested in biochar or know a little bit about biochar here, or those of the fellows who are on the call?
Yes, I'm interested in biochar.
Is that Aman? No.
Oh, it's Duncan McDowell.
Duncan. Hi, Duncan. Yeah.
Hi.
All right. I just thought I'd sort of put it in the context of who's on the call and talk about it, considering Faith's not here. Right. So the short answer to the first part of question is that what role do you see biochar in forest restoration and conservation? I would say huge. I would say for land-based restoration, regeneration, especially these two aspects of land-based ecosystems, biochar is the next, or rather it is the big thing right now. It's sort of gaining pace. It's still very early on. And the main reason for that is, number one, from a carbon, I'm very sorry, there's a background construction noise here if that's bothering you. I'm very sorry about that. So the main reason for that is first and foremost that it locks carbon for over 100 years. So, you know, from a sequestration point of view, it's a very stable way to lock your carbon, and it's a very clean way and a relatively cheap way of doing that. Secondly, it sort of adds the circularity in any ecosystem that you're working in. So biochar is made from the process of pyrolysis. If you're aware of that, which is sort of, you know, burning it at very low levels of oxygen. And what happens as a result, you get it, any organic waste in the ecosystem. So, you know, a lot of times, if you look at it in an urban context, you've got a lot of organic vegetable and fruit waste, say, lying around, in agricultural waste in the rural setting. There's a lot of waste lying around. And this waste, in a circular way, when it's pyrolyzed, the byproduct of it is biochar. And that biochar is like charcoal. And the few properties that we are still learning more and more about biochar, of its applications over and above the sequestration, is it's one of the great ways of using it as a soil amendment material. So say, imagine replacing fertilizers eventually. You know, it has a high water retention capacity. It has a very rich carbon content, of course, if it's made properly. And so over the years, you know, it's slowly introduced into the soil, and there's a lot of research going on in it as well, like what are the ways that we should introduce it in the soil. But eventually it is something that can enrich soil, its carbon holding capacity, its water holding capacity, and slowly, you know, kind of be a replacement for fertilizers, though we are a long way away from that. That's number one. Number two, biochar is, you know, also used, we are testing, in fact, in one of our projects, we're testing what are the various uses of biochar is for water filtration. Because, you know, at small scale level, if you use biochar units to produce clean water at a household level, it's an excellent way to do that. And also it sort of generates revenue in any system for ecosystem services. So, you know, we are, for example, experimenting with tea-lad cook stoves. It's sort of, say, if you take a country like India or Africa, where over 85% of, you know, the cooking is still done through fuel wood, which is a big source of degradation and, you know, stress on the forest. So you replace that with clean cooking stoves. There's one kind of cooking stoves, is tea-lad cook stoves, where you're using wood pellets, and the byproduct of that cook stove is biochar. And one of the models we're looking at is that every month when we collect that biochar from the woman who's cooking, she gets paid for locking that carbon into that. So that's kind of cash in hand. And then that biochar is taken and sold to the farmers to put in their soils. So there are various circular ways that biochar can play a role. Having said all this, there is a lot of work being done right now to determine what are the best ways of producing the best quality biochar, which is as pure carbon as possible. What are the various sizes of pyrolysis unit? Like we've got industrial size pyrolysis unit, or like these cook stoves, which are tiny, that can produce biochar. So there's a lot of innovation going on there. It can also be produced through human sludge. So it's an amazing way to, again, look at waste and circular systems in an ecosystem, where if you're taking human sludge and converting it into biochar, we are looking at a couple of actually companies who are doing that right now in one of our projects. So yeah, it's very promising, and I would say to watch out for biochar is a very important element of land-based restoration and regeneration.
Amazing. Thank you very much. That was a full answer. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you.
Thanks, Shiba. So the next question, I think, I mean, it's aimed at both of you, but I will ask Para to answer first. The question goes, there's very little focus on marine ecosystems and their benefits in climate change mitigation, especially in non-developed nations. Do you know why this is? Is it a result of the traditionally slow process of learning about and understanding the marine environment, or the lack of resources, or for another reason? I'm also pasting this on chat.
Yeah, sure. I guess thanks for the question. It's being a narrative for quite a while. I mean, like developing countries and the contribution. I guess with climate change, it's an ongoing process, and the fact that climate change needs some global effort that makes these kind of different levels of intervention and global, you name it, national, provincial, regency, and even local communities could somehow need to be linked together. And especially with marine, the chain of impact is a bit much further. I mean, if we talk about coastal ecosystem and blue carbon, you could really manage to get a primary data on blue carbon. You can do the methodologies and account the blue carbon and how it kind of impacts the climate directly. But when you talk about MPAs, talk about coral, where in the blue carbon initiative, coral reef is not considered as part of the blue carbon ecosystem because the absorption and the release of emission of the carbon is quite equal. Because so we don't see any sequestration process or within coral reef. So that would be a challenge. So one thing that CI is doing at the moment is bringing this different level of communications around climate change and emission avoidance or reduction into account. So we're starting from the local communities level. How can they be aware of climate change? Because I would say climate change is not a concept that you could really tell people in the local community and they'll be quite on board in the first day. So you should kind of, what CI is doing is kind of link it, climate change, to perhaps alternative livelihood. We put around a layer of food security and scarcity, nutrition, things like that. And to kind of provide alternative livelihood. For example, in West Papua, we need to convey the message that you need to protect mangrove ecosystem, not because of perhaps blue carbon and climate change only, but you could really enrich your fishery, coastal fisheries, products like mud crabs and so on. So I guess these kind of messaging, as I see in the fellow background that was sent, is quite various. There's a few of filmmakers here. So I guess these kind of communication materials and packages need to be thrown out there. So I guess coming from a local level point of view and then trying to bring it up into the national commitment. So how does local changes or local intervention on marine ecosystem and marine conservation could somehow tick the boxes in the national commitments and then push further to UNFCCC, for example, in terms of the national commitments for global. So I guess talking about marine ecosystem and talking about climate change is like two different things, but somehow we need to kind of connect them together. through initiatives, through the chains of impacts. So I would say M&E would be quite a key here to monitor over time and the progress in terms of marine conservation. I would just stop there and give Shiba her thought as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Farah. I mean, I was relying on you to kind of this is sort of your space. But having said that, because in my work we look at regeneration as a whole. So we look at what are the new economic models of development that are regenerative. So, you know, they're ticking the 3 Ps of the, you know, the whatever you want, triple bottom line and all of those things. It's economic models. And of course, ocean and coastal communities is like a huge opportunity area that we are very keen to explore and learn more about that. My work so far has been largely concentrated on land ecosystems, of which the major anchor regenerative, so to say, infrastructure on land is forests. So when you look at oceans or blue carbon, one of the things that we are finding is that there's a lot of scientific community right now, and Bara, you kind of touched upon it, where, you know, there's a lot of debate, what works, what doesn't work. And a simple thing like we said that if seaweed is sort of growing in the carbon, you know, in the ocean floor, I mean, can that be used to even simple biochar production? You know, there's a lot of seaweed, and in one of the projects we were sort of exploring in New Zealand, in these Maori youth community, where their little, you know, channel canals were clogged with seaweed, and that was, you know, playing havoc in the ecosystem. Now, could that be used and converted into biochar? You know, there was a lot of scientific debate around all of those things, which I think we're still in that realm. You know, like with forests, we've made a lot of progress, and everyone knows that, oh yes, trees is not the answer, but we need to sequester the existing carbon from the atmosphere as a contributory channel to reach our goal. But we are still, blue carbon, oceans is very, very early on in that cycle right now. But it's a, I don't know right now, I have to study, but it's almost like a more opportunity for us to reach to our carbon goals, to harness the oceans yet. But my work hasn't involved that yet, but I'm learning more, especially with seaweed. Yeah.
Thanks both. Also, just a reminder to participants, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat box, and I will try to answer them as much as time permits. All right, I get our mentors to answer them as much as time permits. The next question is from Ellie, who is also not on this call, but they ask, what are the best ways you are aware of to preserve marine ecosystems and mitigate climate change at the same time? Are there any companies, policies, or other initiatives that you know of that you feel are accomplishing both these goals simultaneously? And yeah, Bara, do you want to start off, and then maybe Shiba can take over? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I guess from my angle, when we talk about marine ecosystem, well, you have others, you have MPA, you have fisheries, definitely, and even we're talking about fish biomass that could also contribute to that. But I would really try to answer from a blue carbon point of view, which is coastal ecosystem. So I think when we talk about blue carbon, we talk about mangrove, it's always 2 different sets of work plan, basically. Either it's conservation or restoration. So whether we want to protect what we have left and kind of have that different intervention on setting up the protection team, setting up the monitoring tool in terms of that, and how over time we kind of get that primary data in terms of carbon sequestration and storage for conservation. Whereas in restoration, you have to consider time, you have to consider protection for the restoration area itself, because the sequestration rate, and especially from the finance point of view, I guess Shiba did mention about that in terms of developing a blue carbon project. In the first 5 years, at least, the project would spend a lot until it get carbon credited after 5 years, starting year 6, perhaps. So these kind of things need to be somehow amplify and scale up into a national level or even provincial level at this stage, because those kind of intervention are usually the site level. And this is where the gap, if I may say, it's a gap, because the intervention is on a site level, whereas all the policies usually in a provincial level or even national level, quite far. So when the national people would talk about we need to protect this, this, and that, it needs to somehow connect with the interventions on the ground, if that makes sense. So the thing that we're trying to do actually is to kind of connect this whole level, and how by the end of the day we have an agreed baseline. For example, Indonesia, you know, we have heaps of islands with different local communities, different sets of mangrove ecosystems. So it needs kind of different approach in terms of both restoration and conservation. So the thing, one thing that I might raise that Shiba mentioned about financing mechanism that she's working upon. So now CI is kind of looking at how we can include the insurance companies, since the question is also about talking about, is there any commitments or initiatives on that? We're trying to get the insurance companies to kind of have this linkage with the financing system, with the restoration activities. So looking at the private sectors or infrastructures around the coastline, and how we kind of implement the green gray infrastructure to somehow restore or protect the mangrove ecosystem. And that would kind of link with the premium of the risk of the insurance itself. So I guess we also want to build this whole financial mechanism around private sector's investment, not only with government and local communities. So I guess the scale of intervention is a thing, but also to kind of connect throughout this level is also another thing that we're looking at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Bara is saying, I mean, this is at least what I find in the work that I'm doing, and especially in the early days. You know, there's the whole idea of climate change, marine ecosystems, forests. These are like really huge, big things, and it's like really, it feels like firstly you feel very distant from it, because you know it's like kind of not something that you can just coherently understand very easily. Number one. Number two, you know, it's there's a lot of terminology there, like Bara was saying. There's restoration, there's conservation, then I've used the word regeneration, you know. So there's a lot going on there. I think it's and to understand what policy is at national level, what is happening on the ground in the private sector, Paris Agreement, it maybe makes some peace with the fact that everyone around the world is like getting their heads around this. So, you know, it's not like people have figured it out and it's happening on the ground and, you know, it feels too much to take. So it's all right to kind of feel a bit overwhelmed. And so like, how do you do this? Because something like how insurance policies can, you know, have different kind of premiums and how do they model their risks is very new. It's not being done before. So, you know, these are all first times. What we are looking at is, for example, in restoring land ecosystems, we are developing a financial model where we say that for any investor, it'll increase their chances of success of return on their investment by over 80% if they were to invest in interconnected practices on the ground of soil, water, forests, and fuel, rather than investing in 20 startups that are working separately on these issues. So, you know, these are all new things that we are talking about right now. I've just posted a link on the chat, which is an event link for air miners and ocean sequestration, CDR, which is carbon removal. Have a look. It's from the 11th of this month onwards. Something that I might also go and learn a bit more about. So any people who are looking at oceans and marine ecosystems, it can be helpful. Duncan, you have a question about whales being a scalable carbon sink. I don't know. I don't know enough about that right now to answer that questions, but to build on what Bara said, mangroves is something that is, you know, the really huge opportunity that where the world, the scientists, the policy has reached a point where we agree that, you know, mangroves is a huge opportunity area for sequestration and carbon targets. And in my work, I'm looking at Madagascar, Bara. I mean, you're in Indonesia, which is like the Mecca. And we were also looking at the coastal communities in Madagascar for mangroves as increasing the area covered by mangroves for carbon sequestration and community livelihoods there. That helps.
I have a follow-up question to that, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm always a bit confused as to what the exact definition of blue carbon is. So is coastal the same thing as blue carbon? So I gather that mangroves and salt marshes are considered blue carbon, or are they referred to as coastal?
So that's a great question. Even in the national level and among scientists, we still kind of question that. Actually, there's a image I'm trying to find. There's a rainbow carbon. You have the black carbon, the brown carbon, red coming from algae, blue, green. So it's becoming a fun thing to see it's evolving, Duncan. But I guess related to your question, the Blue Carbon Initiative, at least the ones that CI, IUCN, and IUC from UNESCO is developing, the definition of blue carbon itself is mangrove, seagrass, and tidal marsh at the moment, those three. I guess a few of scientists from C4 that I know refer those as coastal blue carbon because you have the deep sea blue carbon as well in terms of the definition. So it's still floating around. But for definitely mangroves is one thing, like Shiba said, because due to the high carbon sequestration and carbon storage, that the ability of those ecosystem is the primary blue carbon at the moment that we're looking at. But CI is now touching upon macroalgae as well as a part of that ecosystem.
Okay. I also don't want to hog the microphone here, but I just have a follow-up question to that one as well. So with regards to macroalgae and marine biomass cultivation, how far, and this is probably something I could Google, but I'd rather ask the experts, how does that apply to international waters? So for example, how far does a country's national jurisdiction extend from the coastline? And what happens if you're going to cultivate, if you're going to do kelp farming, let's say 10 kilometers away from the shoreline and international waters?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I guess well, the discussion around blue carbon is I would say, from my knowledge, is not there yet, because the high waters is the discussion is around the fisheries at the moment, and especially for Indonesia and Asia Pacific, it's still around the IUU fishing, the illegal fishing vessels. So that is still being discussed in the Sustainable Ocean Economy panel that I knew lately, and they kind of published this, what we call, you might want to have a look on that, the blue papers. So you have several blue papers. You have about blue carbon. You have about the natural capital accounting itself for coastal ecosystem. So in terms of the open waters, I would say carbon. Even the questions on the whale being a carbon sink, it's still under research. Like Siba said, I think the blue carbon research is not there yet, Duncan. I mean, we need more data, we need more baselines. And the thing I guess about baseline itself, I would really emphasize on baselines, because the blue carbon ecosystem is spread around the globe pretty much. And even in Indonesia, the baseline is being considered not settled yet, because the government has their own methodology, NGOs has their own methodology, and private sector is using others. So I would really urge to kind of start the path from the baselines itself. So whether we have enough global acknowledged baselines in terms of moving the science into, like Shiba said, finance or even policy stuff. That's my 2 cents from my side. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Duncan. That was a fascinating discussion. We also have a question from Ayushman, who says he'd prefer to articulate it vocally. So Ayushman, could you ask your question, also tell us who you address the question to?
Yep. Thank you guys for coming. I would like to ask Shiva. So I know your work is basically more towards forest and land regeneration, but I would want to ask, how is the landscape of regeneration agriculture in India? And are there any projects you know that I could follow? And the second part question is, how is the government playing a role in land regeneration in India? Is there a database where people can see, and what's the relationship between public entities and private entities?
Thanks, Ayushman. So yeah, regenerative agriculture is a major part of land-based ecosystems. So essentially, it's regenerative food production. So how do we really produce food now in our world, which is not at the cost of destroying the whole ecosystem? So in short, the opportunity for that in India is massive. So regenerative agriculture is sometimes a bit confusing that it is sort of expressed in various ways. So you can say agroforestry is one form of it, then interspecies, interspace farming is one part of it, multi-led farming. These are all forms of regenerative, meaning they're sort of building the soils as you're growing food. So you're not just extracting, you're also giving back to the soil and preparing it for further production. So there are actually n number of projects, startups. WRI, in fact, is working on any sort of integrated project on the land. Regenerative agriculture is a major portion of it. So you can follow multiple startups that are looking at food forest production, regenerative growing from your single crop, going on to multiple crops. There are many small startups that are doing this work. When you look at UN projects, WRI, that's World Resource Institute projects, many of them are at the large scale, where they're also sort of coupling it up with maybe restoration of a forest, which is related to the agricultural lands and so on and so forth. So that's a good one to follow. Now, whether there's a database in the Indian government system for these sort of projects, I would say the terminology varies a lot. So regenerative agriculture is not something that is very commonly used in the Indian government or official lexicon. It's mainly agroforestry projects that you may look at. And within agroforestry, you'll find many ways of how food production is being looked at, which is away from fertilizers, which is beyond organic and is regenerative. So I would sort of look for agroforestry as such opportunities in India. And finally, what role does the government play? I think it's an evolving space right now, because for a long time in India, the biggest subsidies in the agricultural sector right now is still for diesel. And that is to pump water, to increase your food production. And the second biggest subsidy is for fertilizers. So while there is being a shift to understand that these extractive ways of producing food and destroying soils is not going to be sustainable for India for a long time, the biggest policy landscape is still these subsidies. Now they're sort of moving towards a little bit of organic, when they say that, okay, they're going to stop using these fertilizers to produce clean organic food production. So if you look at Assam, look at the northeastern countries, you look at Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, these are the states that have sort of come big on organic food production. Now, how do you move from organic to regenerative? Now, what does that mean? Regenerative is not only you're not using fertilizers, but as you grow food, you're actually building your soils and sequestering more carbon. So it's sort of creating more surplus, so to say, and it's creating, that abundance as you grow food. I think this concept is still being socialized right now. And biochar is one of the big ways of, building soils as you produce food, multi-led farming, and then the whole system of how do you grow food in a small amount of space, which gives you not only equal returns, but possibly even more returns from what you were making from double or triple the size of that land, so that, you don't need to forest or, to produce that amount of food anymore, or you don't need to add those kinds of fertilizers on large scales of land. It's very new, Ayushman, right now. And in this new space, I would go and look at some agri-regenerative startups that are trying to make their way in. Yeah.
Thanks, Shiba. So let's do a little bit of a jump in terms of, oh, hang on. Vipa wants to know if biochar is a replacement to chemical fertilizers or a good to have.
Sorry, who's that? Who's asked that question?
In the chat, he's asked if biochar is replacement to chemical fertilizers or a good to have.
Ideally, it should be a replacement method. But right now, it's not even good to have because firstly, people don't know much about it. And there is not enough production right now for farmers to consider biochar as a real option as a soil enhancement material for their farms. And what is the biggest sort of space right now that we are trying to figure out with biochar? That in what, firstly, how it's produced. So how pure is the biochar that you've produced. So there's something known as these volatile components in the biochar that can sometimes not help in breaking it down in the soil. So it depends, number one, what is the pyrolysis process, how biochar is produced. Number two, to what quantities per, say, square meter, per acre, to what depth in the soil that it needs to be placed for it to actually be an enhancement material, whether it's sort of, holding the moisture in that soil. Number one, that's the main thing, holding the moisture, that is what makes it regenerative. And number two is also, it's kind of leading to more organic material being formed in the soil. So right now it's neither. It's neither a replacement fully, I would say, and neither good to have, but I would say that it should be an essential as we go forward. And that's at least the aims that we are having in our projects that we are designing right now. In our business model, we are investing a lot in biochar and having assumptions right now in our hypothesis that it's going to create 10x returns for farmers and investors by putting in more resources towards biochar production.
Thanks, Shiba. So let's do a little bit of a switch in terms of moving from subject-based questions into questions that are sort of, examining how we actually get jobs and transition into climate. So one of the questions that we felt would be important to answer in that context would be, what do you recommend to those looking for jobs in the field? Where do you see the most opportunity, and where do you need more people to sort of plug in, and with what specific skill sets? Bara, I would maybe ask you to start over here with this. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. I would say it's not a one cap fits all kind of approach. I mean, like each of us got different experience and backgrounds, to be honest. But I had a Terra session with one of the fellow that had asked, like, he had a finance insurance background and he wanted to move to aquatic biology kind of career. And I would say, like, that's, to be honest, in the conservation world, it's one of the approach that we highly encourage. I would say if all the conservation people having the same background, it wouldn't be any innovations. So having said that, I guess to have a different background working in the same team, that would really provide more innovations, provide more, I would say from a financial point of view, business model that we could really implement to conservation or restoration at the same time, and climate change. But I guess going back to the question, I would say the fact that climate change is a global issue, is a global crisis that we're trying to tackle. So each and every component in it, for example, working in agriculture and terrestrial, or even in the marine and blue carbon world, somehow could kind of bring that indicators to the bigger global climate change. So for example, in CI, we have what we call the Southern Star. So that is pretty much the internal SDG that we have. And we try to break it down into levels until individuals. So we know that our job description pretty much is contributing to which kind of climate star, or for the Southern Star within CI. So I guess these kind of approach and to kind of have this mapped out through the plan of the career would be super helpful. I mean, like open up, even with LinkedIn, I know a few people are connecting in LinkedIn. I do use that a lot. I guess to urge us to connect people beyond our specialty is a must, I would say. I wouldn't connect to all blue carbon scientists only. I would open up to any other people beyond blue carbon discussion. So I guess I wouldn't say that I have a plan for the career. I'm pretty much going where the wind blows, and pretty much if it's conservation, then I'm there. So like I said previously, I'm working in the terrestrial with the Sumatran tigers conservation, going to the palm oil waste management using my engineering background, and now I'm stranded in the mangroves and muddy waters. So yeah, I mean, like, open up the opportunities for others. I guess that's my 2 cents. Back to you, Siva.
Yeah, just I think copying from Bara, there's not a single sort of source that, oh, this is the way to transition into climate space. And also, like, there's talk about whether it's climate, whether it's planetary restoration, I mean, there's sort of, ways and ways of looking at what this work can involve. So the way we are looking at it in my work, in my organization, because we have a sort of a, between our co-founders, we have a design background as well. My co-founder comes from a design space, sort of backed by IDEO. I come from a really practical, working on the ground directly with, the end user sort of space. So we have, we are building teams which, what we call is, in fact, I wrote it yesterday, because we're going to post something on it to hire, is where we have a business head, we have a business head, meaning someone who thinks in the business ways, someone who thinks in finance ways, someone who's an engineer, someone who has a human-centered worldview. What are the human needs that we have to meet? And then a scientist, which necessarily doesn't always have to be part of the team, but we access science a lot as part of our work. And for us, that is what forms a team for any of our projects. So we're not really looking for climate specialists, so we're looking for engineers, we're looking for finance people, business people, human-centered sociologists or anthropologists, and that's what Bara said, that you need all these different sorts of people to actually form a team. So that's number one, that regardless of what you're doing, right now people are figuring things out, and we need different perspectives of looking at the same problem. And regarding the specifics of learning the technicalities, actually that is, dare I see, the slightly easier part, that you can build that knowledge base. But it's learning to think and looking at a problem more holistically rather than a single problem with a single solution, because that's not get us very far. That's one. Number two, I posted on the chat that there's a platform called the Global Regeneration Lab. It's called the GRC. That's one platform where you can sign up. It's open to anyone. You can give, say, if you want to give my reference, you can give that in case they ask for it. It's again a platform where it'll open you up to many people who are trying to figure out what's happening in the regeneration space, which is one way of articulating the climate change challenge. So you say, I want to enter into regeneration. So there are people all over the world who are doing various projects. You come to see what kind of work is happening around the globe, and there are participatory sessions there. That's one way of, sort of getting more into this community and seeing how you may find opportunities for, projects, jobs, and transition into this space. The second space is, there are a lot of these sort of platforms and courses where, design challenges where, you put teams together and you're looking at, okay, how do you deal with the waste in Manila? So these are all available online. If you look at these design challenges, they're about 6 to 8 weeks. Again, a great way of looking at a problem and how to collectively work with others. Who none of them are experts, but they're sort of, coming up with innovative problems. And that opens up a lot of channels of how you may, become part of a project or approach a company, do an internship or do a small project in that way. Any of you, if you're sort of keen, you feel free to contact me. We have, we are always exploring in our projects right now, and there are always opportunities for people to come and have a dab and see how we are working and how you can contribute. So that's another channel.
Thanks both. The next question is kind of linked to that, which is, where is the most opportunity to expand climate impacts in your line of work? Again, maybe I'll ask Bara to start and then we can go on to Shiva.
Sure. I don't have a definite answer for that, to be honest. It really depends. The spectrum of the work, at least for myself, again, I try to re-emphasize the connections, just the being connected from the local level up to the national level, at least for one country, and even for a region. For myself, I kind of link the best lesson learned in Indonesia and kind of implement that in Philippines, the financial mechanism in the Philippines, try to pull that into the Fiji, and Fiji for policy, so I guess to create this networks of connection and how to build what you call it, the best approach and best management practice on a certain things, that would be super helpful. So I guess throughout time, at least CI, we're kind of developing a best management template for everything pretty much. So when one restoration works in Indonesia, for example, these might be replicated to others, and how to scale it up to kind of tick the boxes, for example, for national commitments. And I guess I throughout time, I always try to kind of have, how to put it in words. So when we have this national level meetings, I always tend to be the local person guy to kind of provide the insight from a local level point of view. And vice versa, when I sit in the local level with local communities, I try to bring this national level thinking. So then the local government could somehow shift their heads into like this could be linked to the national commitments number 1, 2, 3, something like that. So I guess to have that kind of connections, kind of be the catalyst for that kind of discussion going on is one way that we kind of achieve that kind of linkage between levels of I hope that makes sense though. I mean, like there's no a basic guidelines on how to, but I guess if we could get somehow in network and kind of connect these great initiatives in different levels, that would be super impactful from experience.
Yeah, I mean, like what Bara has said, that's the holy grail of impact, where various stakeholders at all levels are aligned with one unified goal of whether it's a small local project, a country level, or an international project or policy. That is the holy grail of impact. So this sort of single focus, just user provider, this just doesn't work in this challenge. We have to look at various stakeholders playing their role for scale and for impact. Now to kind of break that down, how do we, sort of aspire to kind of align these various stakeholders in whatever work you're doing, in whatever project you're working on, in whatever company you're working, or organization, NGO, whatever it is, like say for example, Terra is a stakeholder in the map, and the way we look at it in like what I would do on a daily basis is we map a system. And so say if we're designing a project right now in the south of India, so it's a region, we are saying we're taking a region of 1.2 million people where they live, there's so many square kilometers. It's a severely water distressed region. That's the main distressor in the region. And as a result of that water distress, there is, the economic development is not really happening. So there is a lot of mass migration, youth are moving to the cities like in Bangalore. There is, poverty levels are still sort of persisting, forests have gone, there's no water, there's no farming, there's no surplus. It's a very distressed system. Now, if we look at this region, then we map like who are the stakeholders in this region that can have a role to play. So can Terra have a role to play? Yes, it could be maybe a source of interns, for example, or maybe source of people who might want to be able to contribute in this. Can the local mafia play a role in that? Yes, absolutely, because they're involved in the deforestation, the national, the international. So it's sort of called systems thinking. So you sort of the way to also increase sort of climate impact is to train ourselves, and if that could mean take courses, read, is just how to think in systems. That's number one. We haven't been taught that in our schools, and that's something new in the world is sort of coming around that. So let's think in systems. We're talking about ecosystems here, so we have to think of our work in terms of systems and who's part of that system and where is the money flowing, where is the materials flowing, who do we need to involve in our project. Number one. Number two, what I'm focusing on as one major impact area for us to achieve is a different economic development model. So right now we have a development model which is extractive. We are focusing particularly on sort of emerging sort of spaces where need is the most and the resistance to change is the least. So say in the context of India or in Madagascar or wherever we may base it, it's an extractive ecosystem right now. So if you look at a timber supply chain, it's just extractive. So we may go and plant 100 eucalyptus trees again, but that is doing nothing for that forest, that land, that community. But yes, you can say I'm creating jobs, I'm contributing to the economic development of that region. But it's an extractive model of economic development. Our aim to create maximum impact through my work is to show that regenerative economic development models can work, show that through our projects, and show that through regenerative principles, which is where that you're not just extracting, but you're actually creating more abundance in any system where you're creating more jobs and creating more businesses. You create an ecological abundance and you also create an economic surplus for the community and the investors. So that's sort of my single focus aim through my work, to say that this is possible and these are our projects that are showcasing that. But it's a long road. Yeah.
Thanks both. I think that kind of resonates a lot with some of the debates we have here in academia as well, where we talk about, how different academics in different sectors operate in silos, so to speak. And then, you have very valuable information existing in individual pockets with very little collaboration across these various groups. And something that people are trying to focus on is how do you then, in terms of practice, how do you get individual scientists sort of collaborate with each other and share knowledge, but also from a more theoretical perspective, how do you go beyond, siloing ourselves with individual case studies or one size fits all solutions to achieve middle ground. And I think some of what you just spoke sort of resonates a lot with that. As towards the last question, I think something that that we'd like to end with is there any kind of a practical, so to speak, advice about transitioning? I think we've touched upon a lot of that, but in terms of what is the one thing that you would potentially advise yourself retrospectively when you reflect back on your own career and the transitions that you all have made? Maybe something along those lines. Maybe that's what we'd like to end this session with. Shiba, would you like? Bara, I see you unmuting yourself, so go for it.
Zoom is super powerful. Hey, when you see people unmute, like you want to talk. So yeah, it's I guess I might start. Again, I have no particular holy Bible for it, but if I could recommend myself, read more, learn more, and network more back in the days. Because I would really emphasize on the network part. So a huge shout out to Terra to making this kind of networking process going on. So because I guess if my networking ability, I would say, happens long before, I would be somewhere out there more than now. I would just put it out there. So every time we talk with the scientists within the office, we'll say, if you have a paper, please think also how to kind of market the paper instead of use it by yourself, because you can make a super great paper, but it will be just used for you and your inner circle. But if you have like an okay-ish paper, but you can really channel this to a different kind of initiative, that would be super impactful. Like linking what Shiva was saying, the system thinking, it's one of the approach to kind of see this overall, because impact is a strong word. I would say we're using system dynamics modeling basically to kind of see the connection between fisheries, energy, forestry, and so on, and what's the trade-off between those sectors. So going back to a practical, I would say network more and do network with people beyond your expertise, I would say. I mean, like to broaden up a bit and see a different point of view, even for the same issue. Even for blue carbon, I was talking with a financial person, and they got a different point of view from that kind of scientific niche of thinking that I have. So again, my practical would be network, and you always bring a new value and innovation to the discussion. Like the old samurai say, intelligence is about talking with three people. So this is an intelligence session that we have now. So that's from my side.
Yeah, but I was thinking exactly the same. My first line was going to be cross borders. I wish I had, I would say retrospectively, I would cross more borders, speak to people who are seemingly unconnected to my work, involve them in what I'm doing, learn more about if, they're not into sort of what I'm doing, what are their views about it? And now I think with more and more the narrative of climate, these boundaries are much hazy. So, you can cross borders much more easily. So have a diverse set of friends and a diverse network. It's extremely important. Number two, get out there on the ground and become part of a project. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year. Get on the ground, because this is, we can sit and talk about systems, and we can talk about interconnectedness, and we can talk about regenerative agriculture and blue carbon, whatnot. You need to get in there and just kind of get a sense and tactile feel of how things are and how complicated sometimes it is, but that doesn't mean it's not sort of moving in the right direction for us. I mean, life is complicated, so it's kind of to make peace with that. So really kind of get some practical experience under your belt. Regardless of what point of time in your career you're transitioning into this space, do lots and lots of internships and projects. I would really highly recommend that. And finally, I think for me, the framing of my challenge was very different, and I feel compelled to share this. Now, when I meet someone, or when so whether it's a government officer or a Goldman Sachs banker or a scientist or a IDEO designer, I would immediately train my mind to say, okay, what role can they play in what I'm doing? As opposed to maybe 5 to 10 years back, I would say, oh, their work is really different. They're not really applicable to what I'm doing. So I think this has been the major shift in how I look at opportunity now. And that's helping me.
Thanks so much, Shiva. That sort of reminds me of a tweet I came across very recently where someone posted some article, but the quote that accompanied it was essentially, would you hire someone who seems like the best fit for the work you do, so to speak, or would you hire someone who brings out the best in your team? And that was, yeah, that really, that kind of shift is really what we need. And yes, to networking, because that's something that you learn so much from. Thanks so much, everyone. This was a wonderful session. Thanks, Bara and Shiba. Do indicate if you would like mentors, fellows to contact you via LinkedIn or thing. Please feel free to, sort of share your details with them. Thank you, everyone. We shall end this session now.